Hey, this is Misery Loves Company, a social greeting series hosted by miserytourism.com. Every Friday, we welcome outsider and transgressive writers to come and share their work with us. And it's Friday again. But before I announce the first reader, since this is going up on YouTube, a little announcement of our own here at Misery Tourism. We are going to begin accepting submissions and publishing again. So there's more information on our Twitter account at Misery Tourism. There's a pinned tweet there, which you can check out if you want all the details. But long story short, we're going to open up for submissions on March 1st, and we are going to begin publishing again on April 1st, April Fool's Day, the 12th birthday, excuse me, of Misery Tourism. So um, there we go. That's it. That's it. So first up tonight is Rudy.
Hi. So before I start this, um, I wanted to say something, but I forget what it was. Oh yes. So this is a kind of rehash of or rewrite of one of my older pieces, the Ideal Art shit superhero theme stuff. I rewrote it to make it more Looney Tunes. The second thing I wanted to do uh, was preemptively apologize to all my Jewish and African American friends, but especially my Jewish friends. As Richard Nixon says, uh, I am not an anti Semite. Anyway,
And Josh is still getting his laundry, so he didn't hear your apology.
fair enough. So this first one is called The Sound and the Furry. It was a Monday when Ashraquat put on her ultramarine magic burqa, who was named Amir. After a suiting up sequence that was part Warhammer 40K, part Miss Marvel 2022, she also donned a fursuit that she had just purchased on eBay. The extremely online terror cell commander was glad for Amir because he provided a buffer between her person and the outside world, which in this case was the inside world of the suit that probably contained cum and Allah knows what else. Ash entered the furry convention fully intending, according to a manifesto posted on her live journal, to kill the artist formerly known as Krakow, an immortal Jew who could make sound effects with his mouth and make them real too. The two enemies met in the central lobby of the hotel that was serving as the main convention hall. Ash was dressed like a coyote, and Krakow, who had taken the name Berg, was some kind of necky bird. Mimi, Berg said, using the beeps to tastefully censor the anti Semitic remarks Ash made when she recognized her nemesis by smell alone. Ash swung her scimitar, trimming some of the Jewbird's blue faux hawk with a satisfactual slice. For a fleeting second, she pondered a degree in cosmetology, the texture of hair in her hands, the feeling of voluminous curls squirming between her parted fingers brought brief sensate ecstasy. Then, moments later, sensory overload as Berg's wiggling lips, disturbingly visible through his crude knockoff costume, conjured the sounds of animals fighting. Rawr. Meow. Grr. The convention became a melee, a dust cloud with stars at all, as personas slammed padded fists against soft and hard heads. Berg made like Killian Murphy's Oppenheimer, disappearing into the chaos, while oppressive sounds beat against Ash's brain. Amir tried his best to block out the noise, spontaneously redistributing his blue threads to form a pair of earmuffs for his sense-laden, clinically autistic friend. Meanwhile, Ash gave chase, knocking facsimiles of cats and dogs aside as she launched into a dead sprint. The fursuit pursuit led to an elevator. Hold the door! And that lucky Mimi disappeared again, descending not to eternal punishment, but to sub-basement 1. The dark, unswept stairs were hard to take, nearly blind and deafened. Note for the accessibility czar. So Ash took off her coyote head and let Amir echolocate by reciting the Ayat al-Kursi. As the living word of Allah bounced off of obstacles, dirty needles, dead homeless, cans of Monster, Ash sharpened her scimitar with a whetstone she produced from her infinite pockets. She tried the door at the bottom of the stairs, and some very frustrating lock Foley noises stopped her from entering, even though the knob turned. She tried the knob dozens of times, trying her patience in the process. Hold on, she thought, and then she stood on tippy toes to peer through the window at the top of the door. Berg was on the other side, sounding off something fierce. Not to be undone, Ash pulled 2 princes out of her pocket, purchasing rockets from the usual one. She surfed a scud straight through the door, sending shards of metal and cinder block into a crowd that had just disembarked from the elevator, then rolled to the ground, dusted herself off, and re-engaged her enemy. Berg started to run. Meet me! But Amir formed a lasso out of his hem, which Ash tossed by hiking it off the ground to her hips, then hula-hooping it, then jump kicking it towards the wandering Jew. He was snagged instantly. Ash delivered the coup de grace with her scimitar, but as her weapon made contact with flesh, more fully. This time, the sound of metal harmlessly bouncing off metal. Tink! She tried again, the sounds of lightsabers clashing. When she raised her sword a third time, the saddest violin in the known universe started in. Oy vey. She looked down at Berg and saw his personal struggle with alcoholism, his family at Krakow Plazow concentration camp, his son being taken from him, his son crying tears for a father he never knew. His son was Jesus Christ, a major prophet in Islam. His son was Billy Corgan singing Bring the Light. A son of God, you know you must arrive in the light. The sun was in Ash's eyes. She was not crying. Eventually, the light turned to darkness as Ash wept and the curtains closed. Finny, curtains open, Foley. Swish. Beat me. This next one is called Behead Those Who Say Islam is Violent. As Ashraquat decapitated the fleeing French minister of culture, her anthropomorphic burqa's eye perforations doubled in size, allowing her to better track the trajectory of the woman's head careening into a wall. Boing, said the nasally Foley that was everywhere and nowhere. The head bounced off the eggshell wallpaper of the Interior Ministry, splashing it crimson before landing back on Madame Culture's shoulders. And on this she-frog ran as if nothing, not colonialism, not the burqa ban, not the severing of her own mop top, had happened. This was haram as fuck. So that's my finger. Ash sliced again, splitting the woman in half like some kind of Napoleonic cavalry flourish designed to break the lines, and one half ran this away and the other that away. Both halves waddle hopped around with an avian flair, flared sleeves from her suit dress voguing for no one at all. While pondering which goose to chase, Ash could hear boots advancing. Impossible, she thought in Inspector Clouseau's accent. The French always retreat. Amira tugged at her sword arm to get her attention, and when she spun around to face the ministry courtyard, an entire legion, the French Foreign Legion, was marching in. There was an unarmed soldier who looked dangerously Semitic at the head of the column, goose-stepping with a puffed-out chest. A bullhorn was at his lips. The sounds of the boots clacking against cobblestone were coming from the bullhorn, not the boots themselves. Ash squinted. Wait a minute. But it was only mere seconds before the hail of machine gun fire sent her darting back inside. Boots pursued. In a desperate attempt to hide, Ash disassembled a suit of armor in an alcove, put it on, and stood really still. The troops surged by her oblivious. Then one of them, an apparent student of history, noticed the scimitar, a thing very out of place on a 12th century French cavalier. It was hard to run in the armor, despite its mobility being constantly talked up by all the SCA reenactors on YouTube, and Ash nearly slid into the purple haze chamber marked powder room after rounding a corner sharply. Breathless, he scanned her surroundings. Nothing but fancy soaps, cosmetics, and unattended Chanel daywear. Disgusting. Amir started to tug again. then hugged Ash tight. Ashley Laurent walked out of the powder room with a Louis Vuitton bag that was larger than necessary, but such is the way of les fashions. She was dressed in the products of Parisian haute couture, which frankly looked like they were conceived by a violent, mentally challenged man who had just watched Blade Runner and asked his exhausted support worker to draw a lady in cyberpunk clothes. And the worker did it because they didn't want to have to get punched in the face by a fucking retard for $15.75 an hour. The centerpiece of the outfit was a transparent blue veil that seemed to bounce with a life of its own. Très chic. As Miss Laurent sauntered past the Legion, some of the men whistled. Some sported visible erections like the priest in The Little Mermaid, while the priest from the Hunchback of Notre Dame looked on from somewhere with damnation on his face. But let's face it, even he had a boner for this extremely hot, extremely cultured olive temptress who had seemingly emerged from thin air as a Jinn might. The Semite soldier watched Ashley's butt as she fled from all this attention and clearly flustered by the cat calling. In time, with the steady rhythm of ageless misogyny, he heaved his mouth to make a va-voom sound that echoed until the black vignette of Allah's male gaze closed around her swaying booty. Ouch. This is an interlude called The Ugly Americans. Karen and Jim are the ugly Americans. Karen is a Jewish woman with hair the color of Homer Simpson and doty eyes. Jim is a huge black guy who looks like O.J. Simpson, Heisman Trophy pose at all times, even during lovemaking. Karen works in marketing where she shoots dumb ideas like free throws into the company's nets. Gross. Jim runs touchdowns at his software engineering job. His software's performance at runtime is decided by how fast and how hard his thick melanated legs can propel him. Scrum master, scrimmage master, scrummage. Today, Karen and Jim are on vacation in Sri Lanka. With her nice camera, Karen looks like snaps from the Burger King Kids Club with a skin that makes her Jewish. Jewish as a service. Season pass for April, modest Yahoo OST. Drop it when Netanyahu drops bombs. Jim just looks like a living Bored Ape NFT, no cap. The cap raises the price by 0.5 ETH. He's the black monolith of the family. Nigger Jim is his AOL Instant Messenger name because his relativity field makes everything within 10 feet of him the way it was in 2001. The Sri Lankans are pygmies compared to Karen and Jim. All the guides on this village tour the Uglies are roughly 10 years old because of Jim's relativity field, so they're just being led around by children, like children. Entitled Westerners touring a comfortably impoverished village with the same energy as a boomer dad in the 1990s watching you play video games. Can you go into any of the houses? Karen and Jim have been everywhere, like the song from the commercial says. They bought a Mercury, like the song from the commercial says. They cause autism, like the mercury from the vaccines might. Karen meets Jim outside the World Trade Center's North Tower at some point in time, but it seems like yesterday, relatively speaking. They kiss while the flames are hot and the fireman runs in and out, covered in white. Oh, look, America is under attack. This last one is called the Anti-Defenestration League. By current year of the Islamic calendar, Ash and her selectively fundamentalist caliphate had blazed righteously across the greater United States, turning hoes into housewives faster than Dr. Dre could say Allah Kazam. Employing her loyal bloodhound Sogdiev, a rabid anti-Semite from backwater Kazakhstan who could track Jews over hundreds of miles by scent alone, she planned to snuff out the last Jewish comedian in the wild, Sasha the humor Baron Cohen. Sogdiev's work as a press shit sniffer had left him with a keen olfactory sense. His nose for the media was a cornerstone in the culture unsavvy Ash's plan to sweep through the filthy public restroom of Hollywood with an executioner's blade, doing everything inside parentheses first, like PEMDAS. Outside of this, though, Sogdiev was a little touched. He would spend hours staring blankly at his own reflection in the windows, like the giant Overton window that served as a windshield for the Baron's estate, a glass house of ill repute that walked or scurried on a set of gangly, distended human legs. This foreboding McCastle, which was like Howell's moving castle if the Howell was Allen Ginsberg's, is where the pair wound up after locking on to the funny man's trail. After losing Sogdiev in the cement and aluminum halls of the estate, Ash found the Kazakh spaced out while regarding himself in the Overton window's smoky crystal, which was tinted to conform to the upper limits of California road legality. She reached for him, then whoosh! Shards of glass and public opinion were flung everywhere as the massive structure shattered on impact with Sogdiev's lanky frame. Some unseen force had propelled him through the glass like a crash test dummy. Ash pirouetted to shield herself from the crystalline hail, instinctively drawing her scimitar. Amir shuddered so that he could shake off the debris, and so that I could make a reference to Intifada. Ba-doom. Then a finger curled. The trigger was depressed, the gun fired, an arm recoiled, a face with a big schnoz laughed maniacally. Ha ha ha! A bullet with aerodynamic wings shot the scimitar right out of Ash's mitts. Twink! Cohen! Ash reached for a pencil in her deep pockets, then drew another scimitar. It didn't look as menacing because she wasn't the animator, who had lost his job to a black, soulless entity, me, the author. Support human artists. She wound her arm back, aiming to cut the head off the snake in the literal, figurative driver's seat. Tense rubber band being drawn back fully filled the room as Ash went through the motions. The noise was thought and deed terminating. Her concentration broke with a loud snap. Too much tension. Her arm and her brain went flabby. Berg laughed from everywhere, save for hallowed locations in Poland and Germany. In those, he held solemn vigil. Cohen smirked, and then he kicked Ashraquat mean, through the jagged remains of the Overton window, where she beheld things beyond the pale. Glass cut her face as she and Sogdiev tumbled through ideologies out of time, space, and the public perspective. Sogdiev's ill-fitting gray suit was torn off by people from a world where public nudity was fully acceptable. North American men danced in their birthday suits along with North American boys celebrating their 10th birthdays. Jewish space lasers disintegrated life on Earth in a world where batshit conspiracy theories choked social media to death with the white-gloved, four-fingered hands of Dennis Rader, and the histoplasmosis of hysteria was wielded by believers great and powerful. Sogdiev rode the nether of incomprehensibility like Tony Hawk, doing ollies and shit. Berg was humming NoFX now. Technicolor lunacy yielded to infrared absurdity. All of this contributed to a level of vibratory personal distress that Amir had never felt in Ash before, which culminated in her being rendered catatonic. He took the liberty of animating the fabric in her gloves to move her hands, because a burqa is nothing if not a tool to control women's bodies. He reached into her pocket, withdrew a plastic key to paradise, and inserted it into a lock visible only to him, a couple Ayatollahs, and maybe Bilbo Baggins during the last light of Durin's day. The black vignette, which had started to close around them, opened into white light. Allah's voice was on the gentle wind, giving sway to all atoms of creation. Ash could hear it even in her stupor. It said, in an accent that was more Mel Blanc or Mel Brooks than she was ready for, "That's all, folks."
Um, man, I authentically love these pieces. I, man, this is some sublime shit because I love what you're doing here with like just almost feels like an evolution of your style, right? Like for a while now you've been kind of like playing with the more slapstick side of things like political violence. Now to go full Looney Tunes with it is, I think, a really, really clever thing to do. And but more than that, your execution here is really fucking brilliant. This isn't simply like thematically Looney Tunes meets terrorism, or Looney Tunes meets Middle East conflict, or Looney Tunes meets like rabid anti-Semitism. It's written in a way that fully captures the manic vibe of a Looney Tunes cartoon. I love the incorporation of the actual Foley noises within the text itself. And I love your performance of the Foley noises too. That was very, very effective. And the way that you lean 100% into this, like the way that all of this shit that's laden with so much ugly meaning in in our world is like completely and totally subsumed into this dimension where everything is slapstick and everything is manic and insane. The way you do it is just it's just really really effective. Like on the level of the prose itself, you have that like rat-a-tat cadence of a Looney Tune cartoon. Now, I will say there were a few lines here too that absolutely killed me. The everything within parentheses line is
I, I actually that that I apologize for that one, Lord. I apologize, but I spent a while on that one because I was like, I want to do something with the three parentheses shit or whatever.
Mhm.
But yeah, I spent a while.
No, the
I spent too
comparison
much
to that
time.
to like math problems like the
Right.
yeah, no, it's a very good. And I think my favorite of these is well, I don't know. I really love the first one and I really love the last one. I love the like actual like the turning of the Overton window into a Looney Tunes prop in the final one is genius. Like literally getting thrown through the Overton window, and the way you describe that, like as if it's this kind of dimensional rift beyond which are all of these ideologies and political ideas that are just beyond the pale. Like that's fucking genius because it's so in keeping with what you're trying to do here with the Looney Tunes theming, right? But it's also just like really a really ingenious just use of that terminology. And then the first one, the like fully supervillain conceit is just so good. It's just such a brilliant conceit. Like the idea that, and the way you execute it too, like the idea of like using those Foley noises defensively, like he uses the like the like locked noise to keep her from going through the door, and then the way he keeps her from beheading him by like showing the like stream of like by doing the stream of different sound effects is just really clever and ingenious, and especially the final payoff where he uses the violin to like make her feel bad for him, and it's all of this is just really well done, man. I think these are some of my favorite stories from your Ideolarx series, honestly.
Thanks. For anybody who's heard it before, I just wanted to ask: do you think this one? Do you prefer the old ones or the other ones? I don't know if anybody remembers the old ones. The old ones are like Cat State, like the Israeli army one, or the the two state solution one. Then there was the other one that was this story that I took basically went through and took the best bits from a lot of these, like the Saudi, the Borat, and Cohen thing. I took from that. I was wondering which one people preferred because I was thinking about just rewriting all of those because um I didn't like how they played out. They're too not serious, but they're too like a much a character study. Whereas this, I think, as you mentioned, is more like Looney Tunes. But either way,
Yeah, I don't remember the others super duper clearly, but from what I remember, I would say I have a preference for these because
mm,
I think on like the level of prose, like on like a sentence level, these are a lot more dynamic than I remember those being, and these like they're more propulsive, and I think they're funnier. Whereas the others I remember being more like just sort of straight flash fiction pieces. Am I wrong
right.
about that?
No,
Like,
you're not. You're not wrong. And I think I said there's too much character. The characters are too human. That's the weird thing, but to say. But yeah, okay. Anyway, thanks, man.
Yeah, thank you, man. And so, following up, now it's Josh's turn. Hey, Josh, are you here? Are you back from the laundry?
Yeah, am I coming through okay?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, good. Just changed the mic. Okay, so gonna continue with auto portrait where I left off last. Our intrepid narrator had just listed 25 house tracks from the 90s that they would include on a mixtape. And that was the end of chapter 10. So I'm going to begin with chapter 11. I believe in total self-exposure. Three-pronged forks deeply unsettle me. On nights when I stay home by myself and am not drinking, I go to bed around midnight, though sometimes lay awake until 2 or 3 a.m. I'll try to read or jerk off or oscillate between reading and jerking off. I think Freytag's pyramid is bullshit, and so is Chekhov's rule about the gun. I nagged my mom to take me to the air show, only to burst into tears over the noise and beg her to take me away. She encouraged me to stay, probably to get me to face my fears and grow, but she eventually gave in. I garnish hot dogs with mustard and nothing else. I'm my own ride or die. My dream car is the Lotus Esprit. I collected hockey cards for a few years but stopped before graduating elementary school. I have a weird thing for jazz flute solos. I'm very ticklish. In 2019, on my first date with the schizophrenic woman who tried to destroy my life, she apologized for interrupting me. It was the first and only time she convincingly apologized to me for anything. I take my coffee with 2 creams and 1 sugar, foregoing the double doubles I used to order in favor of a healthier lifestyle choice. My Facebook bio, which I wrote years ago, reads blogger/socialite, and I can't figure out how to change it. I won't quit pronouncing flaccid as flaccid. If it were meant to be pronounced flaccid, like placid, there would be 1 C, not 2. Olive oil will expire before I get around to using the whole bottle. While playing shows with my teenage punk band that wasn't called Box Cutter Takeover, we ended up settling on pointless effort. I made some bad jokes. At the Elma Combo, or maybe it was somewhere else, I can't say for certain, I asked the audience, has anyone here ever had Ethiopian food? There were a few scattered replies before I said, neither have the Ethiopians, which our drummer punctuated with a rim shot that resounded in the otherwise dead silent venue. Ba-doom-tsh. Ever since I plucked all my nose hairs that one time, they've grown in thicker and have become more difficult to trim. My family insisted that if I didn't attend university right after high school, I probably wouldn't go at all. So I applied to York University for an undecided general arts major. I dropped out during the first semester of my second year while on academic probation with a course load that included an elective course about reggae music. Once I'm out cold for the night, I can sleep through anything. I wore ill-fitting secondhand suits basically every day during my ska phase. I compulsively wash my hands after eating each chicken wing. I'm anal retentive, if you haven't guessed. The meaning of life, I told the gay man I met playing online chess and who I manipulated into buying me an MP3 around 2010, is to have fun. I still believe this to be more or less true, but I'd add the caveat not to mistake intoxication for fun, though it can be. I started writing this auto portrait on October 16th, 2023. It's important to me that I smell good at all times. I've adopted, quote, better them than me, unquote, as my default response to hearing about something bad happening to someone else. It's a cute affect I stole from a character in Don DeLillo's White Noise. My Aunt Lindsay loves to tell the story of how, as a toddler, I literally kissed the face off my Raggedy Ann doll, Dolly. To pacify me, my family had to keep redrawing her face. At a sleepover when I was 8 or 9, I forced my cousin Adrian to sleep on the side of the mattress that was closest to the bedroom door so that if an intruder broke in, they'd get to him first. I was just following orders is a legitimate defense as far as I'm concerned. Don't you think it would be a bit suspicious for a Nazi to turn down a promotion out of, say, ethical concerns? My curfew was midnight on Fridays in high school. I couldn't stop putting my hands down my pants until my family finally realized that the elastic bands of my tighty whities were rubbing against my thighs, a source of unbearable irritation for me. I was switched to roomier boxers, and the problem was resolved. I was no longer castigated for being a little pervert. Nothing matches my contempt for police, except, perhaps, my contempt for patriotism. I own 23 pairs of shoes, including 9 pairs of sneakers, 6 pairs of boots, 4 pairs of dress shoes, 2 pairs of boat shoes, 1 pair of sandals, and 1 seemingly unclassifiable pair. The spider veins on my nose predate my drinking, I swear. Have I mentioned I bought I bought flowers for an escort? Didn't buy the escort. I played Lego until grade 7 when I had some friends I had just made in my first weeks at EJ Sam Public School over to hang out. A couple of them thought the cars I built were cool, but a rumor that I still played with toys soon began circulating around school, so I abandoned Lego for good. My main criticism of the Adam Driver Ferrari movie is that they should have made the Maseratis a different color so they would be easier to tell apart from the Ferraris in the racing scenes. I've stayed up late staring at the few extant photos of Sherwood Anderson that exist. Given the opportunity, I would milk my grief over the loss of a loved one for all it's worth. During the time my sister, who emancipated herself from my mom, was living in foster care, I dubbed her Rachel Foster Wallace. All right, and then this is chapter 12. My pullout game is unmatched. I strive to make my life photogenic. I seek out negative reviews of books that I love. A great source of anxiety for me. I don't have a toilet plunger in my bathroom right now. I'm right-handed. Alex Kazemi has still not responded to my last email in which I advised him on how to save his Wikipedia page from deletion. But he did email me last night, 9:02 p.m. on January 30th, 2024, unprovoked with a link to a new article about himself. The Eames chairs in my living room are knockoffs. Nudism appeals to me, sort of, because I'm super comfortable naked. I sleep naked, I walk around my apartment naked, I sometimes take business calls naked, which is something I can get off on, but I don't want to make my nudity my personality, you know? My mom made me carry a pager before buying me my first cell phone, an egg-shaped device by Siemens. For the egg-shaped device by Siemens, she made me wear a holster on my belt, which I'd promptly remove after she dropped me off at work or school. Domino's Pizza fired me for insubordination. I throw like a girl. I'm most lethargic in February. I lower my voice when sharing a password with someone, even if there's no one else around. 3 writers threatened physical violence against me in 2023. I remember my grandmother getting into a heated argument about gay rights with a Baskin-Robbins employee while she was taking me out for ice cream after a local baseball game. It was getting close to my bedtime. I've mulled writing to Dare Foods to lambast them over the company's decision to cancel the Orchard Fruits variety of Dare Real Fruit gummies, by far the most delicious candy I've ever tasted. I've developed bunions, but they're painless for now. I'll wear makeup if the situation calls for it. I employ a closed bridge grip in billiards. Beginning in grade 9, a guy I'd been cool with at EJ Sand Public School started terrorizing me by calling me Rat Man because of my teeth. If he was with anyone and saw me in the halls or walking to or from school, he'd shout quick to the Ratmobile and sing na 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 Rat Man. I know what I said earlier about team sports, but I'm a Toronto Maple Leafs fan. I work from home 3 days a week, but I'm in the office on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. On office days, I eat lunch at my desk, away from most of my colleagues who eat together seated on stools around the kitchen table. I propose selecting a new Canadian national anthem every year in an annual Eurovision-style competition. It's been years since I've paid to have my taxes done, thanks to an arrangement between my mom and her accountant David, whereby she does his daughter's hair for free and in return he does our taxes. I'm not the type to have the latest tech. I have a 2020 iPhone XR. I've struggled with the tambourine. In his 1973 novel, Christy Mallory's own double entry, B.S. Johnson wrote, quote, "The novel should now try simply to be funny, brutalist, and short," unquote. And this precisely reflects my view on the matter some 50 years later. I was evicted from my two-bedroom basement apartment at 716 Lansdowne Avenue on June 30th, 2016 over noise complaints. I confront people for unfollowing me on social media. My grandmother taught me to say, "Peace be to this house," out loud as a prayer to keep me safe before entering any home or building. I'd whisper it so my grade school friends wouldn't hear. With the internet, I have this strange premonition that it could all disappear in an instant, so I'm regularly printing out hard copies of this manuscript, which I'm writing in Google Docs. I feel like a moron when clapping. My apologies are sincere. I wouldn't say sorry otherwise. A uniform always makes me uncomfortable unless it's one I've chosen. I could write a great screenplay if every character was me. My fifth date with Isabella, the girl I dated who liked baubles in particular, was on December 6, 2019, at the Tarragon Theatre for a showing of Buffoon, a play that is, essentially, a sad clown monologue. I know the exact date because the ticket to the show is packed away in the same box as the weird clay molding my ex-girlfriend Kelly's disembodied lips and chin but no nose sit. I think Melamine would be a beautiful name for a child. Who's to say whether I'll ever be fully satisfied? I'm drawn to objects that are direct and specific in purpose for their reliability and elegance. So, for example, I ride a fixed gear bike not because it's trendy, but because without gears, there are fewer components to break or malfunction. Similarly, I DJ with a pair of outdated Pioneer CDJ 850s, not a laptop. CDJ 850s only have one job, unlike a laptop, which is running lots of different programs and is intended for so many different uses. I'm illiterate in love languages. All the moles on my back are, I admit, concerning. Having dispensed with, betrayed, Gary Barr, the first friend I made after I transferred to EJ Sam Public School in grade 7, because I had the opportunity to make less malodorous, cooler friends, I set to work at establishing myself as class clown in a new environment. I liked making the popular girls laugh, and I gained respect where I might otherwise have been bullied for my crooked teeth or big ears or any number of other reasons, just like Gary Barr was. I don't own anything in polka dot print. I separate the art from the artist. Some say I'm retarded. That's the end of 12.
Josh, so um I am I'm going to be merciful, excuse me, and we're not going to relitigate the flaccid fight, even though you know that I'm on the opposite
Thank
side of this. And we've had this argument so many times. We're not gonna have it again. I and especially because that last final stretch of the second one is so good. There are so many fucking bangers in that. I love I love especially the last two. That is such a killer way to end this end that chapter, right? After the whole like thrust, let's say, of these 12 chapters being this indulgence in like narcissism and navel gazing to include the I separate the art from the artist line is so perfect. Because it's ironic, but also knowing you, I know that's actually what you believe, right? Like I know that's not like a purely ironic statement. So the way it comes off there, and then to follow that up with the like some say I'm retarded thing is just it's just so self-deprecating and nasty in I think a beautiful way. And there are a lot of moments here where you lean like so hard into the uncomfortable self-deprecation to the point that like I'm laughing, but I'm squirming while I'm laughing, right? The whole Rat Man thing. Oh
No
my
offensive.
God.
I still, you know what I mean? Like that was terrible. I've never felt worse in my life.
I know, because I was fucking bullied relentlessly in like fucking middle school too, right? And that shit, like, you think about shit like that sometimes, and you still 30 years later want to kill yourself, right? So for
No,
you,
totally. Although I found out that that guy
yeah,
is a fucking not even a good plumber, a mediocre plumber with a DUI who has to live like 2 hours outside of Toronto. So I mean, it honestly that does help a bit. But I know what you're saying.
it doesn't hurt, right? But no, man, so much of this is tremendous, and I would be remiss not to bring up the fucking I'm illiterate in love languages line. That is so good. I am envious of that line. That's just fucking that is it's a brilliant line. I do have to ask you one thing though. I have to ask you one thing. You know me, Josh. I would never accuse you of cowardice, but I do have a question. I have a question about an artistic choice you made here with one.
Sure.
You say at one point there are in 2023 there are four different authors who physically threatened you, right? And
Oh yeah.
knowing you and knowing what I know about your work, I was shocked that you didn't immediately list them. Are you withholding that information for later in the piece, or were you like, no, I'm not actually going to name names here?
I'm not gonna name names because it's more about like that would be giving them credit for something that I'm making interesting. Like I don't know, I don't find, you know what I mean? It's like it's so
Yeah,
easy to do, and I've been like because I will say that probably all three of them will be slandered in this overall project anyways.
right.
Um, but it didn't seem
I don't know. I guess I see where you're coming from, Josh. I absolutely do. But given like the absolute shamelessness of this piece, right? Like as a whole, like the uncompromising way you were willing to just keep going there and going there and going there. I think like leaving that unanswered feels a little bit like pulling a punch. And I don't want to like I don't want to peer pressure you into doing something that might get you in trouble. But it was one moment where I was like, huh, I'm shocked Josh didn't go there, you know?
well. One of them is in the Zoom right now, but and also I don't have necessarily a problem with all three. I have a problem with I guess two of the three. But the one who is here is someone I don't have a problem with actually. But anyways, no, I get it. It sounds like I'm pulling a punch. No, but honestly, I hadn't thought about it. So yeah, that's a good point. And that's the interesting thing too. It's revelatory, right? Like I'm not thinking about it. Now you mentioned something that I've put down here, and it's um,
I
I don't know why, right? So yeah.
Honestly, Josh, it's a very small point, and it's mostly just me finding an excuse to tease you about something. But it was a little bit surprising to me. The rest of it is killer, and definitely don't let me make any kind of choice for you about whether to name names or not. It was just something I noticed that seemed a little out of character and a little funny. Anyway, man, these are great as usual. Blick is not.
And thanks a
Oh,
lot.
go
And
ahead.
also, one thing, William, not to interrupt,
Yeah.
which I just did. So actually, to interrupt precisely, um, an excerpt of this may be appearing in a literary journal operated by somebody within the call as well.
Hmm.
Um, but we'll see about that later. I will obviously, uh, embarrassingly like promote the link if that is the case.
Interesting.
Because I'm looking for a publisher. I want somebody to publish this. Anyways, that's it. Yeah.
Well, also, Josh, just a reminder, another publication is reopening for submission soon as well. Um, uh,
It wasn't
I
lost
think
on me,
Belay
and
may have
especially
been giving
to
the
be
game
part of a
away.
black to be part of a black owned and operated, or what was it, white owned and black operated literary journal that we
Yeah.
realized it was.
Actually, it's white owned and white operated. Since I'm also white.
Anyway,
I'm colorblind, so I will be
Oh,
happy.
that's fair. Colorless. I'll be colorless. How about that? Like the mana and
Yeah.
magic.
that's yeah. Rudy, an artifact creature, like a golem in Magic the Gathering.
Oh shit.
All right, we're moving on. We're moving on. Josh, thank you so much. Blick is not here, I think. No, Blick is not currently here, so we'll double back, which means Jesse is up next. Hey Jesse, nice to have you back, man.
Thank you. This has been great. I really loved Josh's read. I guess I haven't heard this project up to now, but I think it's fascinating, and it's funny as hell, but it also like really illuminates things that you just wonder about people, and it's great, and I look forward to reading it. What I'm going to read is much shorter than what I read the night of the abuser reading the cross promotion. I'll just start reading it. Red Swirly. Medea plays Tetris, except instead of tile shapes falling and needing to be put together to vanish, she hypnotically sees the pieces of an AR-15 that must be assembled. Then she takes the gun to the preschool where her kids are students and shoots them as well as a bunch of other kids. Then she screams and clutches her head. But no, it's an opera and it's on stage. She's an actor, and the kids laying there dead, leaking blood, are stage effects. Still, the audience gasps at the realism. Since you are of the audience, you can't help but feel the savagery of children murdered as if it happened just now on the news. And pitifully, you haven't yet been fully desensitized. St. John Chrysostom is backstage preparing to come out and stop this madness. Jean Genet wants to stop the saint from doing this, but it's a struggle. Then the movie stops, a triple stoppage, and I am tortured with painting the motion picture still. The actor and the pile of corpses and the audience in the backstage struggle in color. The Gesamtkunstwerk rules my headspace. I have multimedia energy wave beams flowing through my brain, eyes, bald spot, circumcised penis, and hands. My novel is in pieces and it may stay that way. My novel is of the future. The publication history, a bricolage of online multi-platform publication sites flipped through between open tabs simultaneously, ensures the fragmentary disunity and lack of compositional homogeneity that a host of mental dwarves call out for. This is all twinged with the improvisation and lack of contextualized linear thinking that I like about freestyle rap battles. You wanted automatic writing. Freestyle. I don't write none of this shit. Strictly come off the biscuit, blow in your district. Noise bits put together. The geology of the dumpster and alleys in haunted Oilsburg, city of fog. Pilar, the waitress, with the economic equation bling around her neck, heights city blocks in a foot of snow to get home after work at the hotel. Then she's going off to give the psychologist a secret lap dance in his office a day before he is found murdered, stabbed in the neck with one half of a pair of scissors, and in the bathroom attached to his office, his head in the toilet in a red swirly. She is one chapter away from pulling a plot into the black hole of being. During my psychosis, I was a film strip on the desk of Mal Branch's busy editors. The scene where I died got trimmed out and left on the cutting room floor, but the truth leaked back into the movie through IOR doorways in the form of subtle cosmic hints like t-shirt logos and music lyrics. If I had a thought unit while listening to the car radio and Kurt Cobain sang "Yeah," or Ozzy Osbourne said, "Oh, please God, no," while I thought it was a commentary from beyond that my thought was true or false. like that shape in the movie Tron that was just a binary assuming different shapes for yes and no. Acceptance versus prickly denial, represented by the second stellation of the icosahedron. Likewise, every song lyric I listen to is subtly about death, letting me know my afterlife status. Philip K. Dick, Gnosis style, no style, my style, your style. Death cassettes unspooling with secret messages. Ideas of reference and delusions of reference. IOR, DOR. I wish I could put it all in the souvenir box so clear and neat for you. I fell through a crack between genres that was shaped like Philip K. Dick's beard. Malebranche's busy editors cut and splice mental objects according to godly scripts. You try and turn and catch a glance, but the angelic lead time rearranging everything around you is too fast. Epistemologically speaking, God is never offsides. That's it.
Jesse, this is a riveting piece. I love this piece, Jesse. First of all, I am in fucking awe of the first two sentences in this piece. The You can feel that second, you can feel and hear that second sentence click into place, and like the horrifying change of tone and context that happens there as the like Tetris block morphs into the clip sliding into the AK-47. It's so good. It's so like viscerally effective. And it sets the tone so perfectly for what you're doing throughout this piece, which is just like it's like the camera keeps pulling out and moving, right? Like there's this like compilation of images and ideas that all fit like intricately together, just like the Tetris blocks, while seeming like superficially disconnected. And I love how you make all of these sentences like slide and lock together. And I love the way that you provide that like thematic like hook. You like subtly imply or inform the reader something about the structure of the entire piece in those first two sentences. And then what I love is that in the final few sentences, you go back and you do it and you tie it all together again nicely as well in terms of like providing that sort of thematic closure and that sort of thematic clarity. Like the like world being rearranged around not just the narrator but the reader, right? The idea that there's some kind of divine or maybe demonic force that's shuffling all these pieces together, and the way that you have that like perfect opening and that perfect closing, and the way that they inform the rest of the piece, which might otherwise be seen as being like somewhat random or stream of consciousness. It's really, this is a like, I really love this piece, Jesse, because it does something like really remarkable, which is it simultaneously feels like a totally random stream of consciousness, like you mentioned in the piece itself, like a piece of auto writing, and yet like it also feels intricately and delicately and carefully constructed, which is which is not something you can pull off very easily, right? So this is a fantastic piece, Jesse. Thank you.
Thank you very much, William. It just felt good. Thank you and good night.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. And Mark is up next.
Yes.
Hey,
Mark
Mark.
is up next. I was just putting something in the chat. Can you hear me?
Sorry, I had to unmute there. Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. First of all, I want to say I really enjoyed hearing the readers tonight and felt really stimulated to hear the work that was shared. I'm going to be reading 3 poems tonight. I'll put the link in the bio or in the chat. These were first published last year at Expat Press. these are more cerebral than, in particular, the poems I read last week. They've been described as cerebral, which I would say is fair. The first poem is a persona poem, kind of a traditional old school style. The title is A Mail Order Bride Considers a Career as a Model in Her Husband's Native Country. Does it matter who gets to think in terms of B or C cups, a double D or true E, the exception, like Sofia Vergara and Kate Upton, with Jessica Rabbit cartoon proportions and all natural breasts? Or which one of us, she or I, fills in with shadow of crosshatch and lines as you begin to understand what was perfect where you found me. You can't negotiate away. Take with you from that other place. For every model as subtly flawed as I might be the first time we get a call, there will be 10 to take her place who are perfect. And for every one of those 10 who isn't as perfect as the others, there will be 10. Our beauty, like theories in quantum mechanics, waiting for close observation to establish the flaw. We all hear the same thing. Less is the difference between us. Our slight variations ascend to a point like a pyramid, to a point that's ideal, like the dead bodies of victims of Cold War totalitarian dictator murdered with state-sponsored violence to demonstrate in the usual strong-arm fashion a hoard of political capital. The client flips through the portfolio, turning pages of glossy, stiff, heavyweight stock. Light from fluorescent lights set in drop ceiling tiles spills on the shine to flash across a stick-thin woman thrusting out a proud, defiant adolescent boy's bony bird chest. The light is angry, glaring white, like neo-Nazi milk with marching anthem shout. The client looks, only satisfied when he finds the flaw. It's easier never to give up looking for what isn't there than it is to admit it's not there where you can't find it. You're afraid to expose yourself as the person who didn't see what's there and what will have been there in the future, even at a much later date, even in retrospect. Beauty, like theories in science, like innocence, living in totalitarian dictatorships, is provisional, never confirmed, but is always attendant on new evidence. No one is innocent. No one is beautiful. No theory ever is proved. Do you believe in regions so remote, so removed from your point of origin, you start to yearn for a new loss, to learn a new lexicon of distance, rules, and relationships, to track an emotional exchange rate and calculate with each fluctuation? Is there something far enough in the past, or that will come to be that you forget and turn around and look? I'm nothing if not accommodating, but still, I'm unsure I'll be enough to support your unrealistic expectations, grandiose plans. Don't tell me that's part of my allure. Leave me alone. Let me get back to work. The second poem is post-historical, historical. Doc, you meant what? Don't trust the directions. The only directions you need are the betta fish, vase, philodendron. There's something to do with pH levels, the water, roots, and traces of the soil you rinsed away are involved in, but you don't need to worry about that. According to the directions, the betta fish makes the heart-shaped vase of pebbled texture. The opening as wide as a carafe and stuffed with philodendron roots, and bottom mulched with chipped blue glass, like Travis Bickle made his crummy little apartment in Taxi Driver. The fallen angel of bitterest wisdom who taught mankind to write, and so doing to hold on to the past for good or ill, like Edward Rochester confining his Creole half-breed in the attic, or Emily Grierson, who kept the body of her unwitting suitor, the type of man they used to call that way, a confirmed bachelor, a feckless gay, after she poisoned him to sleep beside, or the sadistic Havisham, who gloated over corrupting the mind of her young charge. Language and memory, the bricks and mortar to build the prison where jailer and inmate are one, the turnkey imprisoning who he was to lock away the past, the author and his memory in a ghastly state of decomposition wed, the writer hoarding what is gone and can never be recovered, turning his back on God's present and real to curate someone else's history, the wisdom that doesn't profit the wise. This angel named Penemue, who was tempted from on high by the fair daughters of Eve and corrupted himself with others of his kind in exchange for the dark art of writing, until that time forbidden to his human hosts, was the same that helped the screenwriter Paul Schrader make of his divorce and homelessness a movie script, in order to let people witness how alienation, rage, and guilt could drive a lonely, damaged man to psychosis, mass murder, and mayhem, not to mention toxic masculinity and white supremacy. Also guided Travis in private, unguarded moments to comment on society, which pathetic, stunted attempts at aphoristic insight would instead elicit unintended sympathy, forcing even the most jaded viewers to look away in shared embarrassment for the homicidal racist, a broken man who, despite all his failings, if not outright evil, was a child of God. Gauzy metallic ribbon edged with wire tied in a bow around the neck of the glass heart. That's the angry Valentine Scorsese gave to New York City. The magenta to purple flame of Siamese fighting fish zigzags a sawtooth path like a restless satellite in orbit between ivory-colored roots and glass, sometimes finding the way closed off, its progress through the narrow space obstructed, itself stuck in the sloping shoulder, vivid colors and the terminal serrations of feathered fins strained to a blanched and dreary smudge through finer mesh than window screen to hover there, throbbing like inflammation deep in the tissue of a muscle or chronic stress upon a hypertensive heart. Some places the fish must pick its way over the terrain, the details of which are impossible to see when you look at the roots directly, which is always, to a certain extent. Its leaves like sheet metal, with edges that look just as sharp as unfinished cut tin, dramatic veins of opaque white, and long fluorescent pistils with yellow stamens. The plant is like a stopper in the neck, where the neck is 4 inches in diameter. To feed betta or fighting fish, shortened version of name they're sold under in stores, Siamese fighting fish, once daily. Dip dampened toothpick in betta fish food, rust-colored, crumbly stuff. Then dip in betta fish vase water. Replace about 25% of the bottled water, food area, beverage aisle weekly. Dieffenbachia plant, or Spathiphyllum, also known as peace lily, lawn and garden, can either one be substituted for philodendron with similar results? The last poem I'm going to read has a section where I talk about a modern dance performance that was originally created and performed by the David Parsons Dance Company, no relation, in 1994. So this poem is titled "The Senescent Artist Visits His Alma Mater on the Occasion of the Breakup of His Marriage." The wood battens, wheeze, groan under the feet of the dancers who practice on stage. The heave of jumps, the splintery inhale, exhale as bodies bargain the price of gravity down. The sewing machine staccato of running arced trajectories across the stage describes the feeling in your chest. A person performs a series of leaps punctuated by stutter or half steps. Silence stepped on, snaps back taut overhead. Pipes and plumbing, a collective metallic stomp in time with the landings. This room you're in, both foundation and basement, part of a system of valves and chambers, halls lined with doors to studios poured in the heart of concrete. In the heart of concrete. Overheard by opposing gangs, both of which gangs were seeking control of the 1200 block of 9th Street. Members of the two gangs kidnapped the newlywed couple, who were having an argument in their car that was parked in front of the library 3 blocks from the hotly contested turf. Representatives for the gangs agreed to the couple's safe return, provided civic authorities grant the gangs permission to solve their problems in the streets, alleys, warehouses, and night spots along the waterfront. Grant the gangs the inalienable human right to work out their dispute in their own way. Never forget staring into the dark, staring down the dark of blacked out auditorium, like you are staring down the barrel of a gun, as Robert Fripp's sedate guitar begins to play and stops, and then to play again over what was just played. An electric hum like the echo of the surf crashing over the sound of surf, over and over again and again, intricate sound concentrating your faculties. When out of the abyssal dark the stage leaps forth, frozen, glittering with hoarfrost, every detail freed from the void for only an instant, burns and sears before the latent image dark returns to pulse and throb, while the salts of silver halide suspended in the gelatin-coated contact paper of memory react to that one brief instant of light, and a member of Parsons Dance performs the solo showcase Caught, floating as a series of leaps that flash strobe drenched from front to back around the stage like an animal on a carousel, or cutout silhouettes affixed in a zoetrope cylinder, blinking dark like the space between the intercut of slits creates the illusion of something static perceived to be in motion. Through ribbons of guitar that corkscrew and spiral like ticker tape and spall into the void, you hear the floorboards heave and groan. The pulse of light picks up. The photographic negatives pile up, fill up your short-term memory. You forget where you are and what you're looking at. When the strobe light stops, her prior poses remain as luminous pentimenti, stenciled in the darkness, fraying around the edges like effervescent tablets dissolving in your consciousness, until she appears at the bottom of a well of light projected from above, head down and hands behind her back. Between the crimping of her bandeau top and harem pants, midriff working like a bellows, with every gasp for air, her belly as distended as the ball joint of a Belmer doll. The dark returns, and then the pulse of light that picks her up and never sets her down again, holding her up so she hovers in place, doll-like fixed-posed arms stiff at her sides, legs straight and shoulder width apart, gouging the fabric of some unspeakable darkness.
Mark, I really dig these poems. I really dig what these poems as like a reflection on beauty as a concept, because you're doing something. So it's not unusual for poems to like grapple with the question of beauty, right? But
Yes.
what you're doing here exposes so much of the latent ugliness underneath like beauty as a concept. Like the way it opens with the mail order bride piece, right? And the way that you the like deeply like I don't know how to describe it. The like salacious ugliness of the way beauty is described in that first section, right? And then the way you
Right.
transition into like talking about fascism and the pursuit of the ideal, and like how you really see the dark, like autocratic or authoritarian underside of like trying to arrive at these concepts, trying to police beauty or come to some kind of like the way that the mental models we use to create ideas about beauty or purity or innocence or whatever are so intrinsically authoritarian. And then, man, I love the beta fish section so much, in no small part because Taxi Driver is one of my favorite films.
Me too. Love that movie.
It's a masterpiece. I think it's like When I watched that as like a freshman in college or whatever, I think it was the first time I watched a movie and was like, holy shit, like this is more than just like entertainment or whatever. Like the first time that it felt like there was like something was drawn, like you know what I'm saying? The first it was like
Yeah.
a really revelatory moment for me. But anyway, the beta fish section here, like, I love how when you first make that comparison, the comparison between the beta fish's tank, the little, the
Right.
little
Right.
tank basically they start in, and Travis Bickle's apartment, it seems like it's mostly contrast. You're like, what? Like, because of the perfect, like, beautiful symmetry of the beta fish tank, right? It's this
Right. Right.
this little enclosure, and because of the like absolute squalor and despair of Bickle's apartment. Like your brain doesn't want to make the connection, but then you stick with it. You like go out and you explore the film more, and you like get at what Schrader was thinking when he wrote the screenplay and what Scorsese was thinking when he directed. And then when you return to the comparison, when you return to the beta fish or the fighting fish, you begin to understand how the psychology of this like superficially beautiful creature is so similar to that of Bickle, right? This
Right. Right.
trapped and enclosed animal. Um,
Yes. And that most famous kind of prototypical taxi driver scene where it's like he really is like this animal. Like if you put up a mirror to a beta fish and it just like it will attack itself, and he's like, "What are you looking at?"
right,
You
right. No,
he's just like spiraling in his apartment.
no, that's a great point, Mark. And I love the way you talk about like the way that the film like eventually lures us into feeling this sense of like real mercy and pity for Bickle, because there's that other infamous scene in the movie where the phone scene where he's leaving the like desperate
Yes.
message on Sybil Shepherd's character's on her answering machine, and the camera pans away like the camera can't stand to look at this
Yeah.
humiliated anymore. So I think that's like latent in the film too. And I love the kind of like synthesis that you arrive at in the final poem here at the very end, because like that final section is like simultaneously the like look behind the curtain, right? Like the physical cost and moral and everything else cost of beauty, but it's also an authentically beautiful piece of writing, right? And you arrive at that kind of moment where these two currents actually come together to produce something that's like simultaneously like haunting and despairing, but also beautiful. And it's really effective, Mark. It's really effective.
Well, thank you. I think you've read it exactly. When I was writing these poems, one of the things I was really responding to was Jory Graham. And for me, Jory Graham, it's like erosion, the end of beauty, um, the 80s, where she was really trying to like investigate the idea of beauty as a philosophical concept and the Enlightenment and rationalism. And so a lot of this work was kind of my attempt to grapple with what reading that had, to confront it and contend with her ideas in my own mind.
And I think you did so very effectively, Mark. And I think even I didn't know about that context, and without knowing about that context, I think it still stands on its own very effectively as a like poetic statement. So thank you, Mark. And Jan is next, except it won't be Jan, it will be Keith, with Jan occupying his body. Oh, Jan's warging.
Well, I will not be practicing my Philly accent. This is titled Northeast Regional. No home in my fatherless fatherland, only a coach class ticket up and down gray winter rail lines. Thanks be to God for rusted electrical poles laced with dead vines. and dead trees clinging to black riversides, and substations hiding in algae-choked swamps, and black industry in rain-soaked wastelands, and 11 visits to the dining car, and astroturfed parks kept from refineries, and tanks of liquid methane by ball courts, and coal-fired plants near Spanish mission churches, and old men who talk about science fiction, and windswept marshlands in North New Jersey, and damp heaps of clothes along the highways, and a slow procession of green boxcars, and the unaccompanied senile ladies. I could never write like Chaucer or Villon because the world we live in is unordered. The sun moves slow and cold across the sky. There is no king in Israel, and not a single person follows traffic laws. On the train, I am safe from all harm, and on the train, there are no surprises. And on the train, we are safe from witchcraft. And on the train, there's a little more sense. Each passenger is paid for and marked down. The only direction is toward heaven. For when the Lord comes into his kingdom, it will look like New England. But for now, I am stuck in the American veld, cracked between rolling hills of Pennsylvania, tract housing, counties pitted by Accutane, strip mines empty for lifetimes. God's imperial country land, sixth kingdom of Rome, marriage of Babylon and Persia, King Koresh, David, King Messiah. Why have you left me alone in the wilderness, without a train ticket, without a nation, without anything?
I have fucking chills. Like literally, I have fucking goosebumps. That the final few lines here and the way that this builds up to those lines is legitimately haunting. And Jan, you've accomplished something really marvelous here, which is that there's no trickery to this poem, right? There's no trickery, there's no excess. It's very direct, it's very concisely written, and it's very precise, but also very simple in its language. And yet, the accumulating emotional weight of this piece, like the train itself, just keeps going and going and going and building and building and building in just tremendous way without, like I said, without any trickery, without any bullshit, without any empty showmanship. This is like just pure, like the pure essence of like of like elegant writing right here. And man, first of all, like the emotional cadence of this piece is absolutely fucking sublime because like you you capture something that I've experienced vividly in my life, which is um the weird, like simultaneously despairing and deeply romantic experience of taking public transit in the United States, where like you are just like drawn through this like series of deeply dystopian, sad images, right? Like there's not that much beauty on the to be caught on the Amtrak, or on the Greyhound bus, especially in the Northeast, especially if you're traveling like amid the like sprawl of the megalopolis there. And yet, every experience I've had on public transit, on a Greyhound bus, or on an Amtrak train has been deeply and profoundly romantic to me. There's something about just that sense of movement and progression and watching the world like move by that even if it's the ugliest shit imaginable, it fills you with a sense of like meaning and purpose. And you've captured that like brilliantly here. Man, you are on an absolute fucking tear, man. You need to keep writing and you need to send some of this shit to us in a few days. All right. And Keith, thank you so much for you did a fantastic job with your delivery there. And I believe you have a piece of your own to read now.
Yes. Thanks, William. Will you please post that link in the chat?
Absolutely. I'm
Okay.
copying it now.
In just a second. Okay, thank you. So get set up. So I guess if I were writing my memoirs, this might be a chapter. It's a story I wrote about 6 weeks ago. I originally wasn't going to ever read this, but a couple of weeks after I read it, late one Friday night, early one Saturday morning, I had a change of heart and decided that I would share this one evening. It's very personal, and I think the best way to introduce it would be to tell you what my wife said when I showed it to her and she read it. And her comment was, "Wow, I had forgotten all about that," but I hadn't. And that's what this story is titled, How He Woke Up One Day, a Testimonial. It is so easy to go down rabbit holes on the internet these days, isn't it? His latest trip is into the world of Zen, Z-Y-N, not Zen meditation, but the nicotine pouch delivery system of Zen. How many temptations does one have to experience in a lifetime? It seems like everywhere you look, you see hands holding out apples for you. The setting of the story is late 1984, and he is in his late 20s. The birth of his second son is only a few months away. He's in an added room of their first house, an attached garage, enclosed, with a doorway leading into the kitchen dining room. It's heated and cooled and even has carpet. It's a really nice family room, just over 200 square feet. And together, he and his wife are working on building their family. Having just returned from his day's work in the woods, he has collapsed into his recliner and positioned it back to a 45-degree angle. He's getting ready to watch TV for a few minutes before supper. His wife is in the kitchen cooking. He turns his head and looks through the door into the kitchen. She catches his smile and smiles back. It's a beautiful smile. On his left, wedged between his side and the recliner armrest, his 18-month-old son is propped up next to him, his small head resting on the soft back of the recliner. On his right side is a floor lamp with a 3-way bulb. A circular table encircles the lamp pole at about the height of the armrest of the recliner. His small, tarnished brass spittoon rests on the table. His can of Skoal, fine cut, is slightly behind the spittoon. He reaches over for the spittoon, picks it up, brings it just below his lips, and spits into it. He's really good at spitting. He practices every day from just after he wakes up until just before going to bed. He doesn't push his luck. His wife has drawn a line in the sand and he knows better than to cross it. She's a really good wife, and though they've only been married a few years, he knows that she's the one. Fortunately, his young son has a clean diaper and isn't crying. He is probably in baby nirvana, snuggled warmly against his father, his eyes opened, and watching. He sets the spittoon down and turns towards his son. With the back of his hand, very softly, he rubs the baby's cheeks. They are so smooth and warm. He feels good. He smells good, like babies do, most of the time. He smells supper cooking in the nearby kitchen. Life is so good. Hey, Dylan, try some of this, his friend says. He takes the pouch from his friend, looks down at it, and into the eyes of the Indian, the red man. Without hardly thinking, he opens the pouch and reaches in between his thumb, index, and middle finger. He pulls out a few scraggly pieces of tobacco. It's moist and fragrant. He can smell the enticing aroma before he's even addicted. Make sure you don't swallow the juice or you'll probably get sick, his friend advises. Dylan couldn't say no. He couldn't say anything. He just put the tobacco in his mouth and started chewing. This is going to be a fun camp out, Dylan. We're going to have a blast, his friend says. Dylan spits into the dirt beside his feet, smiles, and agrees. Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. Did you bring the magazines? He asked his friend, being careful to manage his chew and not accidentally swallow the juice. You better believe it, his friend answered, grinning ear to ear. Skip ahead a couple of years, and Dylan and his friend are playing golf. Don't ever spit on the greens, his friend cautions. It can kill the grass. Dylan acknowledges the message and spits into the sand trap. Skip ahead a couple of years, and Dylan has a new set of friends. Hey, Dylan, you want to go downtown to the smoke shop? It's a really cool shop. They've got newspapers and magazines and all kinds of tobacco. He sets his spit cup down on the table, looks into their anxious eyes, and says, sure, let's go. A few minutes later, he buys his first can of Skoal, 29 cents. A little while later, he has realized a new love. He thinks that two loves will be more fun than just one. His friends are all in agreement. Skip ahead a few more years, and Dylan breaks a rule that he has had since day one of discovery. For quite a while now, he's been dipping and chewing outdoors and indoors, but he's always been adamant about drawing 3 lines in the sand. 1, only use around the guys, never the girls. 2, keep it outdoors and only occasionally indoors. And 3, never use in his car. But now he isn't in his car. He's working in the woods and has a truck. And so his now established habit has moved into the truck, and he's broken one of his rules. In time, he will break all of his rules. Skip ahead a couple more years, and the hours in the day chewing and or dipping have expanded. He now carries a bottle of Maalox with him in his truck. And when he looks in the mirror, he can see his gum starting to recede where he puts his dip, just a pinch between his cheek and gum. Dylan has now found his true love and has confessed his habit to his wife. And though she doesn't like it, she loves him and he loves her. Somehow he has rationalized his tobacco use, although he disdained smoking. Back around the time he discovered the Indian, he and his friend tried Winston's, but no go on that. They both were beginning to suspect the dangers of smoking and cancer. Dylan had buried his grandfather who died from lung cancer after years of smoking. But chewing, and especially dipping, weren't that bad for you, he and many others thought, because even back in those days, there were influencers like today in the 2020s. And the superstar Dallas Cowboys football player, Walt Garrison, was the influencer spokesman. He could be trusted. Dylan heard and saw what he wanted to hear and see. Skip ahead another year or so, and for a reason forgotten, Dylan decided to quit. He'd wean off the tobacco slowly. but that didn't work. He started back. And so another time later, he decided to quit again. He'd go cold turkey this time, but that didn't work. And then once again, he decided to quit for good. He was going to quit or die trying. But that was yet another failed attempt. Dylan can't even remember how many stop-starts he went through, but the pattern was consistent. Every time, whether he was off the nicotine for a few days or a few weeks or even a month, he would always save one can of Skoal as a reminder of his vice. Then, predictably, he would have a weak moment and decide to have a dip. It was just going to be one dip. And every single time, usually in less than a week, he would be back to his old routine. The first dip after waking up, the last before bedtime, and chewing when he wasn't dipping. When his son was born in early 1983, Dylan celebrated with a dip. But just over a year after his son's birth, in May of 1984, a young 19-year-old named Sean Marcy died from cancer caused from smokeless tobacco. Dylan had continued to dip after his first son's birth, but now his second son was on the way. His wife's pregnancy had some early complications in July 1984, 1 month into the pregnancy, and he dipped his way through those times and continued, even after the problems resolved. Excerpt from the Oklahoma Magazine, May 20th, 2014, the 30-year anniversary of Sean Marcy's death. In 1983, Sean Marcy had everything going for him. It was his senior year at Tallahena High School, and he was a track star, winner of 28 medals in the sport. He looked forward to the state-level track competition and planned to join the U.S. Army after graduation. Then one day, he opened his mouth and discovered a small sore on the back of his tongue. He waited for the sore to heal, but it didn't. As it became larger and more painful, he finally confessed to his mother that he had been dipping smokeless tobacco since he was 12 and that he was afraid. 10 months later, at 19, Sean Marcy was dead. The cancer. At the time of Marcy's death in 1984, nobody was talking about the dangers of smokeless tobacco, or snuff as it's sometimes called. The notion that smoking was dangerous had only recently caught on with much of the public. Nobody gave much thought to dipping. In fact, smokeless tobacco was frequently advertised on television by celebrity athletes like Walt Garrison, running back for the Dallas Cowboys and rodeo star, and the celebrated baseball pitcher Catfish Hunter. But then, a few months later, in the fall of 1984, something happened. Dylan has it blocked out of his memory, but it's in there somewhere. Usually he remembers really bad things and really good things. What happened must have been somewhere between the two, but it should have been at one of those extremes, because what happened was life-changing. Zen. That's where we were at in the story. That's where this all began. Dylan gets his mind back on track and thinks about Sean Marcy. He's never forgotten. And he thinks about his own anniversary, 40 years tobacco-free in 2024. He doesn't remember the exact date he quit for good because as the anniversaries came and passed, he forgot the month day. He thinks that it was probably in early fall 1984, sometime after his wife's pregnancy complications, but he definitely remembers the year, 1984, before their second son was born in March 1985. But he doesn't remember exactly why he quit. That's the weird piece that his mind is blocked out. He thinks that it might have been the thought of dying and what that would mean for his family, or how, as a father, he should set an example for his sons. He does remember that he was sitting in his recliner with his son when the thought planted itself in his brain. There were so many reasons to quit, probably not just one that would stand out. That makes sense now, he thinks. And so Dylan went cold turkey one last time for his wife, his son, his unborn son, and for himself. Like so many failed stop starts, it was hard as hell to quit. Really, really hard. He most definitely remembers that. He filled his intense cravings and temptations with sweets, any and all things with sugar. Although in his line of work, he couldn't avoid being around others using. Somehow, he summoned the courage from his inner self. Maybe it was the look back from the eyes of those he loved and loved him that was the reinforcement. And then, almost 1 year later, he realized that he had won the battle. His oldest son was sitting up with him in the recliner, his newborn son asleep in his wife's arms as she rocked slowly back and forth in her bent wood rocking chair. Life is good, so very good. And today, January 12th, 2024, Dylan reads the internet story about Zen and wonders. He thinks about his life and his experiences. The only difference today is that what he knows, and he thinks about the words of the Greek philosopher Socrates, know thyself, and how those words go with us throughout our lifetime. We're always trying to know ourselves. And he thinks that maybe he has some more stories that he needs to write. He thinks some more about Zen and Red Man and Skull, and how much he loved the experience, the feeling, the effect. He thinks about the other things too, the things that were way more important than himself. And so he begins. He puts his fingers on his keyboard and begins to type. How he woke up one day, a testimonial.
That was beautiful, Keith. This piece is, I think, a really effective unpacking of addiction. And I think because I think a lot of pieces that deal with addiction really want to sensationalize it, even if they're trying to be like gritty and honest, right? Like, even if they're not going like the dragnet route where like marijuana leads the woman to let the baby drown in the tub or whatever. Like, even when they're trying to be like a like honest look at the psychological effects of addiction, you have few pieces that are as understated and direct about the psychology at play here. The like insidious way you trick yourself into going back and doing a thing that you know is, well, maybe not wrong, but you know is unhealthy, right? The like the impulse towards recidivism that's within all of us. You capture it here in a piece that initially seems fairly low stakes. And I love the way the stakes escalate throughout, just like as the realization sets on your narrator. Like, oh, like this seems like meaningless. This seems like if it's insidious, it's only a little bit insidious, but the consequences, the like cumulative consequences of this thing are legitimately dire. And I love the way you incorporate the actual magazine article in there. That's very effective. Anyway, this is a really great piece, Keith, and I'm glad you shared it with us.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And closing out the night tonight is Brandon.
All right. So we're going to continue on from the last time I read, actually, kind of in the same vein. This one's called 52. When I was 12 years old, I began my enmity with God. Make no mistake, I was no religious child before the age of 12. I felt there was a value to faith and belief, but despite attending a Catholic school from kindergarten until that point, I never felt any connection to God. But that was when something was taken away from me that no child should ever have taken away from them at that age. The illusion that my mother was immortal. We all know as adults that our parents won't always be around. We know that eventually death comes for all of us. And we come to terms with that, and we accept that from a societal standpoint, it ought to be far easier for us to say goodbye to our parents than for our parents to say goodbye to us. But to have your eyes open to this reality at an age where you haven't even had your last growth spurt is an unfair twist for anyone. But even this wasn't what made me swear an oath of loathing against the notion of God. Far more unfair was learning the reality of the situation. I learned around that age that my mother had been diagnosed with a rare medical condition, inherited, 1 in 25 million people, and that she had been diagnosed while she was still a teenager. I learned that my great aunt also had this condition. While I was learning about catheterizations and angioplasties, I was also learning that my mother was the third member of our family in her lifetime to have this condition, and that the other two had both passed away at the age of 52, and that she was sure that her time would come then as well. Instead, when she was 52, a second coronary bypass surgery, accompanied by only the second time in my life that I prayed to a God that wasn't named God, kept her here for another 12 years and days counting. Though I'm sure that it was the science that was responsible for that, not my spite against the uncaring father. When my mother was diagnosed, she became part of case studies in the early 1980s. She also began seeking out therapy to prepare herself for what she saw as the inevitable, just as I was having to do by default of becoming increasingly aware of what was really going on. I learned that she had also been preparing for her end since she was a teenager. She had to come to terms with this years before I was even thought of. While I learned of the history of God and Moses and Jesus and the apostles, I also learned about lipodystrophy, family histories, hereditary conditions, cholesterol, triglycerides, and I couldn't help but ask myself, if God is real and loves all of creation, how can he allow this to happen to the one person in my entire family that I could see no evil in? There was no satisfactory answer. Better still, looking at myself in the mirror and seeing the rage and anger and loathing within me. How could this hereditary curse land on her and not me? It was a question from before conception. There was a coin flip in the ether when I was born whether I would inherit this or not. For years after, I would joke about how I won that coin toss, about how lucky I was that it didn't pass down to me. Internally, I always asked myself why I even existed. Why was I worth the risk? I nearly wasn't even born, as this family curse had previously created such horrible scar tissue that cutting me out was a feat for the doctors when I evidently chose to be born backwards. Fitting then that the inverted child would eventually choose to view God as his enemy, so insignificant that even the family curse God had levied upon us had somehow overlooked me. But the joke is on him, because I intend to never pass it down. The one mote of my insignificant rage toward my greatest enemy, whose efficacy I can be sure of. After all, how else does one win a one-man war against a God that doesn't even know he exists?
Man, this is a heartbreaking piece. It really is, because first of all, I know the personal place that it's coming from, right? And one thing that really like kills me about this piece is that it's like grief experienced in slow motion. You know, like the way we conceive of grief is we lose someone close to us and then we mourn for months or years afterwards, right? Or someone close to us is diagnosed with a terminal condition and they're gone in months and years, and then we mourn after that. But to have like a period of grief and mourning that begins at birth, right? To be basically mourning your mother from the moment that you're cognizant of her, or at least of the possibility of death, to always know that this latent potential for death is there in this way that seems cruel and unnatural. Like the way you unpack the psychology of that and the like natural instinct to like rage against like the idea of religion and the idea of God and the idea of yourself, and like the way like that grief and pain like unfurls into loathing, and the way it impacts like even the sense of your own identity. Like this is a really effective psychological portrait of that, but it's also like really heartbreaking knowing where it's coming from, right, man? It's
Yeah,
a
I
hard
mean
thing.
it's honesty.
Yeah.
That's that I think is the hardest thing about being human, right? Is the honesty.
It's tremendously hard. It is. And I mean, I'm sure it was hard for you to read, and it was hard for me to hear, but your willingness to be like that candid and that open is, I think, is something that's like really powerful and really moving. So thank you for
Thank
sharing
you.
that piece, man.
Thank you.
Um, and anyway, on that note, I think we're going to end it for the night. Thank you to everyone who read tonight. Thank you to thank you to Rudy. Thank you to Josh. Thank you to Jesse. Thank you to Mark, to Jan, to Keith, and to Brandon. This has been Misery Loves Company. We do this every Friday night, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific. If you'd like to join us, we tweet out the link from our Twitter account right before we begin. And our Twitter account is, as I think I said at the top, @Misery Tourism. Well, thank you, everyone. It's been a great night. It's been a wonderful one as usual. All right, that's it.